There's creative data visualization. The Virgil Wong and Akshay Kapoor have done this medical avatar, which is actually under development right now. And what it is a visualization of your medical record from birth to present and even into the future. There's a program they're using in which you can actually age yourself if you don't stop smoking, what your future may be. On the right-hand side is Brad Paley's Text Arc, which is online as well. And what he's done is taken a story, here I think it's Alice in Wonderland, and weighted all the words that appear more frequently in the middle and those that are less frequently towards the periphery. And with his program, you can actually draw the relationships between the different characters. So again, very creative data visualization. A list of curated exhibitions with medical sensory subjects that I've done. One is Divining Fragments at the CPW in New York. And this included artists who were using medical imaging in their artwork. And part of the subtext was that medicine is affected and biased by social and political pressures. We all hear about lab tests that are fudged, fallacious data. And so we need to remember that it's not pure science, quote unquote. Right now I'm working with Caitlin Hardy, who was with NYU. Now she's at Cornell doing nuclear medicine fellowship. We're working on a neuroimaging exhibition in New York City for next spring. And this is an MRI of her brain. She had access to the Tesla 7, which is a state-of-the-art MRI imaging machine at NYU. And so we actually put the word out. Any artists who wanted to gather data on themselves could have a free MRI. That is no longer available. We had 4 takers. This is actually the first show I did when I left the Whitney. It's called Linea Nigra. For those of you who went through a pregnancy and developed this pigmentation on your abdomen between your belly button and your pubic bone, we don't know what causes it. But I used it. This is my MO, my modus operandi, the concept of taking a medical term or a diagnosis and expanding into an exhibition premise or a theme. And here's Shirley Jackson, who's actually an author. She doesn't consider herself an artist, but I found her. What she did was write a short novel, and each of the words in that novel is being tattooed on a volunteer individual, and these people are circulating as this kind of disjointed book, throughout the world, and she'll follow these individuals through their lives. Again, taking a medical term into an exhibition, dermatome. A dermatome is an anatomical area of the spinal nerve whose distribution is not known until you develop an infection like shingles, in which it's reactivation of the chickenpox virus living in the nerve. So it's about the invisible mapping of the body. So I looked at other systems like meridians for an acupuncture and chakras. This is an example of the herpes zoster, the shingles. It's typically unilateral, meaning on one side. It's vesicular or blistery, and it's very dangerous if you have it at the tip of your nose, because the same dermatome that's at the tip of your nose also involves your eye and could lead to blindness. This one is called Ondine's Curse, but it was changed to Oxygen because they felt it was too dark post 9/11. It had to do with breathing disorders and central hypoventilation, which is a disorder of breathing, sleeping disorder, and you can read the rest. But it's been implicated in crib death, and in pediatrics is called dysautonomia disorder. Included, well-known artist Marina Abramovic, who breathed in the skeleton up here to breathe with her. The Colombian artist Oscar Munoz, who created these discs that were mounted on the wall. They looked perfectly like mirrors. When you breathed on them, there were images of the desaparecidos that politically disappeared in Colombia. And then as the plate cooled, the images would disappear. I worked with the 8 senses. I found a scheme where the 6th sense is the kinesthetic sense, the 7th, the immune system, and memory is the 8th, and the cranial nerves. So I work with different systems, organ systems. Now I'm focusing on a sensory approach to curating, having to do with the base senses of smell, taste, and touch, but also look at the privileged senses of sight and hearing. So one of the exhibitions I did was in Sacramento, California, Seeing as Believing, and had to do with antoptic phenomena. And just to shorten the description, antoptic phenomena are perception of light and the absence of light entering the eye. So a phosphene is, don't do this in the audience, especially if you have increased intraocular pressure or glaucoma, you can press on your eye and directly stimulate the optic nerve and create a sensation of an image. That's called an antoptic phenomenon or a phosphene. Here's Adrian Klein, who runs a CUNY Graduate Center series of art and science lectures, which is fabulous. It's about her mother's pituitary tumor, which sat right in the middle of the optic chiasm where the optic nerves cross. And so she uses a saw blade here in a video that's obscure that you can't see. Gloaming is Scottish for twilight, and this is the period in which the works were intended to be viewed when your perception changes from color to black and white. And so these remarkable artists, Paula Hayes and Warren Neidick, who's actually a physician no longer practicing, former ophthalmologist, did something called Purkinje's underpants. And he painted these posts in different colors of red. And if any of you pick roses or cranberries at night or in the dusk during twilight, you'll notice that you can't distinguish which ones are the redder and which ones are not. So these would actually disappear in your vision or at least blend into the landscape with time and fading light. One hand clapping has to do with interstices of sound, language, and speech. This is John Cage's famous piece that was performed by Bill Anastasi. That's not Bill up there, who is Cage's partner for 15 years. Skulldrum is a show that's upcoming in December in New York, the sound show for the deaf, using the vibratory haptic components of sound. From those of you from Gallaudet may be familiar with Wendy Jacob of MIT, who did this activated floor. What she did was turn the floor into a speaker so people could lie in it to feel the vibrations of the music that was being played. So I'm working with a deaf composer, an acquired deafness, J. Allen Zimmerman in New York City, and a very well-known DJ for this exhibition of sound and haptic experiences. The other interest is food, and you may be interested. They have a website, the Experimental Cuisine Collective, and they bring together the humanities and sciences. Most recently, we had lectures on the perfect chocolate chip cookie. We also had, most recently, a chef who worked at Al Bulli, which has now been displaced as the #1 restaurant in the world. But here's someone who uses molecular gastronomy, if you're familiar with the term. An exhibition I did for Visual AIDS, which is an archive of HIV-positive individuals. And I looked at a lot of the images and came up with those that have to deal with food. Here's a patient, an individual with HIV who hated taking his medication, so he turned it into a gun and mask. When I went to Dublin for another exhibition, I discovered this artist who's from Belgium. But his particular take, and I'm interested in food, was making his own blood mousse and serving with oyster mushrooms, currant sauce, and sorrel. Here was his mechanism and instructions on how. So you actually had the bleach engorged and then made into a dish for yourself. Well, the other aspect of food is the starvation, and how to feed the 9 billion people we're going to have by 2050. At the recent lecture at EEC, they talked about how food was refused by certain countries because they felt it was contaminated, poisoned. I'm not sure about the political implications of this, but in part it was due to the ban on genetically modified food and partly a propaganda campaign. So how do we address this issue? Is vertical farming, which is one of the other issues EEC addressed, or how about this? Very nutritious, it's rich in protein, it's cheaper, easy to obtain. This is made from the giant African land snail. It's a perfectly accessible, protein-rich, can fight iron deficiency anemia dish. So looking, again, at the cultural context of presenting things. Meat that can be raised in petri dishes. TPN is for individuals who have malabsorption problems or people who don't have intestines or faulty intestines. But the complications are fatty liver, sometimes requiring transplantation, and other complications. What are the alternative ways of feeding people? Well, in France, La Laboratoire has come up with Le Wif, which is a way you can ingest chocolate just through your breathing, and it's also available in vitamins and coffee as well. Marty Goucher, that I met in Barcelona this past summer and spoke to him about some food projects, did pharma food, this food bar with inhalable muesli. He also did an alcohol party. This is gin and tonic being vaporized into a weather. Neurogastronomy. There's a neurologist, chef named Romero, just opened this restaurant in the Dream Downtown Hotel in New York City. So this is a typical dish, shellfish and seaweed cream, beautiful to look at. What he did was fool the brain, he says. He uses a trick to the satiety system in the hypothalamus. So having ingested water instead of food, you feel full. There may be some implications in the obesity epidemic we're having. There are olfactory tests, and we're winding up, so I think we'll still be on time. My interest has segued to both the medical and the aesthetic components of fragrances. So I'm working with perfumers making fragrances, working with an artist, Nancy Burson, in New York, who's formulated a scent for world peace. Well, these are the clues that I'm taking and trying to synthesize an approach to this problem. So I'm not sure how many of you know that the loss of sense of smell is one of the first symptoms of Parkinson's and in Alzheimer's. A lot of physicians aren't screening for it. These are usually found out in retrospect. But there are screening tests that are available for those who are at high risk. There are smell, as I showed in the previous slide, there are smell strips that can be used for that purpose. So I'm going with several premises that the brain is wired differently for the first cranial nerve, the olfactory nerve, because it's the most primitive. It bypasses the thalamus, which is thought to be the processing center of thinking, but goes right to the limbic system, or the emotional center of the brain. Then second, the anosmia that I mentioned. The third is that the olfactory neuroepithelium continues to generate itself in response to lesions. And in a term called neuroplasticity, that change of the environment and other input can actually change physiologic and anatomic changes in the brain. So there's an ongoing study now at UCLA in which we're using RFID, radio frequency identification bracelet technology. And what happens is that in patient facility, a patient will walk past a bank of monitors and will bring up familiar images, family images. And what I proposed to them was piggybacking an olfactory stimulus, a pet smell, a favorite food, a partner's perfume or cologne onto this, but then using the fMRI to look at the summary effect of the olfactory onto the visual. And this is my last slide. Thank you.